Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today is February 8th, 2026.
Good to be here.
You know, if you've been following the headlines recently, or honestly, if you've just been trying to buy a car or a new graphics card, you know the world feels, well, it feels tight, tense.
Yeah, that's a good word for it.
We're
Tense.
not just talking about the usual uh, political posturing or, trade deficits anymore. We are talking about something deeper, a fundamental shift in the plumbing of the global economy.
That's a really good way to put it. The plumbing.
Right, it feels like the pipes are being rearranged while the water is still running.
And everyone is trying not to get wet. Or not to get flooded, I guess.
Exactly. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We're diving into the chip war. And I know what you're probably thinking. Semiconductors.
The eyes just glaze over.
Yeah, it sounds like a college lecture you slept through. But this isn't about how your phone loads Instagram a little bit faster. This is, and the sources are really clear on this is about military supremacy. It's about economic survival.
It's about what everyone, and I mean everyone, is calling the new oil of the 21st century.
Is that a fair comparison, though?
Yeah.
We'll get into that. But
Oh,
first,
yeah.
let me just say, I think this is probably the most important story of our time.
I don't say that lightly. It is. It's so easy to gloss over because the technology is, it's invisible to most of us. You don't see the chip inside your toaster or your car's braking system.
You just expect it to work.
You expect it to work. But this is the battlefield now. It's not tanks rolling across borders, not yet anyway. It's export controls, it's tariffs, and it's these really distinct strategies from the U.S. and China to basically choke each other out.
That is a huge claim, choking each other out. But before we get into all the gloom and doom, let's set the table. We have a massive stack of documents for this deep dive.
We do.
We're looking at the 2026 AI Policy and Semiconductor Outlook from ML Strategies. That one is hot off the press. We also have a comprehensive review of the book Chip War by Chris Miller, which is essential for the historical context.
Absolutely. You can't understand today without it.
Then we've got a really heavy-hitting scorecard on Made in China 2025 from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission.
That's where we get the real data on who's winning and who's losing.
And finally, some deep geopolitical analysis on the geopolitics of silicon and a few recent congressional reports on export controls.
So it is a lot of paper. But the mission here is actually pretty focused. I mean, what we're trying to do is decode how a tiny piece of silicon, something smaller than your fingernail, has completely reconfigured global power.
And assess who's actually winning. As of right now, early 2026, who is winning this industrial race between the U.S. and China?
Yeah. And I suspect the answer isn't as simple as checking a box that says USA or China.
And not even close. It's asymmetric. It's like one side is winning the brain and the other is winning the body. But we'll get to that.
I like that analogy, brain versus body.
Okay, so let's start with the absolute basics. You mentioned that new oil comparison. We hear it in every op-ed, every news report. Is that actually a fair comparison?
Hmm?
Because oil is a commodity. You dig it up, you refine it, you burn it. A chip is, well, it's magic sand.
It's a useful analogy, but you're right. It breaks down if you look too closely. The similarity is dependency. That's the key. In the 20th century, if you cut off a country's oil supply, their tanks stopped.
Their factories stopped.
Their economy collapsed. Today, computing power does exactly that. The Chip War Review puts it perfectly. Chips process and store information for everything, from the microwave in your kitchen to the guidance system on a hypersonic missile.
So it's the foundational input, not just for the digital world, but for the physical world, too.
Correct. But here's where it really differs from oil. Oil is distributed by geology. You just have to find it and dig it up. Chips are distributed by competence. You have to build them. And building them is, without a doubt, the single most difficult manufacturing process humanity has ever attempted.
Wait, harder than going to the moon.
In terms of sustained microscopic precision, absolutely. Yeah. Here is a stat from the source material that I can't stop thinking about it.
Okay.
Every single day, we as a species manufacture more transistors than there are cells in the human body.
Hold on. You mean in one human body?
Yes. There are roughly 30 to 40 trillion cells in your body. We make more transistors than that every single day. And each one of those transistors has to work perfectly, or the entire chip, a multi-million-dollar piece of silicon, is trash.
That is That's actually hard to visualize. It sounds like a fake number.
It does. It feels impossible. And the barrier to entry to even try to make these things is just as astronomical. A modern semiconductor fabrication plant, a fab, costs over $20 billion.
20 billion.
To put that in perspective for you, a Ford-class aircraft carrier, the most advanced warship ever built, costs about $13 billion. So a single building in Arizona or Taiwan costs nearly as much as 2 aircraft carriers.
That is insane. You have to spend the equivalent of 2 aircraft carriers worth of money just to open the doors.
It's just to play the game. And here is the real kicker. That $20 billion factory, it will only be state-of-the-art for maybe 3-4 years, tops.
And then it's obsolete.
Then the technology moves on, Moore's law marches forward, and you have to upgrade everything. It is a relentless, unforgiving money pit.
So it's no wonder there are so few companies doing this. I mean, I always wondered, if you're Apple or Google, you have the cash. Why don't you just build your own fabs?
They have the cash, but they don't have the institutional pain tolerance. It's not just money, it's the supply chain. It's the know-how, the decades of accumulated trade secrets. It's a specialized form of genius.
And that concentration of difficulty, that's what leads us to the most dangerous concept in this whole stack of documents. The Silicon Shield.
Yes, Taiwan. You can't talk about ships for more than 5 minutes without talking about the elephant in the room.
Or the island of the
The
river.
island in the room, right. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company TSMC, let's just lay out the numbers. They produce 37% of the world's total computing power.
Okay, that's a lot. A third of everything.
But that number is actually misleadingly low, because when you look at advanced chips, the stuff that runs AI, the stuff inside your iPhone, the stuff inside an F-35 fighter jet, they produce over 90% of it.
90%. That's not a market share. That's a monopoly.
It is a chokehold. And this is the basis for the geopolitical theory of the Silicon Shield.
The idea that this concentration actually keeps the peace.
In theory. The idea is that if China were to invade Taiwan, they wouldn't just be fighting an army. They would be destroying the very factories that their own economy, their own tech giants desperately rely on.
So if TSMC goes offline, the global economy crashes.
Instantly. China's economy crashes. The U.S. economy crashes. It's a kind of mutually assured economic destruction.
It's a terrifying kind of stability. It's like two people standing in a room full of gasoline and one of them is holding a lighter, but they both know if they light it, everyone burns.
That's a very accurate description. But clearly, as you can see in these reports, Washington isn't comfortable with that level of risk anymore. We are seeing a massive historic shift in U.S. strategy to try and break that dynamic.
Okay, let's get into that.
Mm.
The U.S. strategy, the sources call it weaponizing interdependence, which sounds like a very fancy way of saying we're going to use the fact that you need us against you.
That's exactly what it is. The U.S. had this realization a few years ago that while we don't manufacture the most advanced chips anymore, we let that capability go to Asia decades ago, we still control the choke points.
The invisible parts.
The invisible but absolutely essential parts of the supply chain.
Like what, specifically?
Okay, number 1, design software. It's
Okay.
called ED, Electronic Design Automation. You literally cannot design a modern, complex chip without software from American companies like Synopsys or Cadence. It's impossible.
So we own the blueprints,
Hmm.
or at least the pens.
We own the pens. And number 2, the equipment. The machines that make the machines. The U.S., along with key allies like the Netherlands and Japan, controls the market for the most sophisticated manufacturing tools.
So the Bureau of Industry and Security, the BIS, they're basically the bouncers at the club.
They are the gatekeepers of the future. It
Obvious.
sounds dramatic, but they decide who gets to buy the tools to build the brain. We saw the first massive wave of this back in October 2022. That's when the Biden administration put really strict controls on AI chips.
Right.
But jumping forward to where we are now, in early 2026, the strategy has evolved. It's gotten more complex.
I was looking at that 2026 AI policy outlook, and there's this new rule from January called the AI diffusion rule. It sounds like a sci-fi novel title. How does that actually work?
It's an attempt to stop the leakage. The problem was that China was using cloud computing services in other countries to access the chips they couldn't buy directly. This rule tries to plug that hole with a tiered system.
Okay, so what are the tiers?
Tier 1 is for our closest allies. NATO countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia. They get easy, almost unrestricted access to the best chips.
Okay, that makes sense.
Tier 2 is for what they call vetted data centers in other parts of the world, places like the UAE or Singapore. They can use the chips, but they have to prove they have robust security, and they aren't secretly letting Chinese companies log in and use them.
And Tier 3.
Tier 3 is the presumption of denial list. China, Russia, Iran. Basically, if you are on that list, the U.S. government starts with the answer no, and you have to move mountains to convince them to even consider saying yes.
But there's been a pivot recently, hasn't there? We are in the second Trump administration now, as of 2025. And the sources suggest a pretty significant change in tactics.
A huge change.
It's described in the analysis as moving from clean preemption to managed conflict. What does that actually mean in plain English?
It means the gloves are still on, but there's a price tag on them now. The rhetoric is still tough, America first, contain China, but the mechanism is becoming much more transactional.
Okay, give me an example.
Look at the tax deal from August 2025. This was a huge shift that kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people, but it's critical. The administration cut a deal where NVIDIA and AMD can sell certain chips to China, specifically the downgraded NVIDIA H20 and AMD MI308, but there is a very big catch.
There's always a catch.
They have to pay 15% of the revenue from those sales directly to the U.S. Treasury.
Wait, pause for a second. The U.S. government is acting like a mob boss. You can sell on my turf, but I need my cut.
In a way, yes, that's a cynical take, but it's not entirely wrong. The analysis in the ML Strategies report suggests this represents a really deep philosophical shift. National security decisions are now being negotiated in exchange for direct government revenue.
So what's the argument for doing that? It sounds like you're just profiting from the thing you said was dangerous.
Their argument is, and you can see the logic, China is going to get these slightly less powerful chips anyway, through smuggling or their own efforts. So we might as well tax them, control the flow, and use that money to fund our own R&D and the CHIPS Act.
That is deeply cynical. I guess it's pragmatic.
It's highly controversial. The security hawks in Congress hate it. They say we're selling the rope China will use to hang us. But the business pragmatists and the companies themselves argue that it keeps NVIDIA and AMD profitable, which keeps them American, which keeps them innovating faster than everyone else.
Okay, so that's the tax. Then there's the AI Overwatch Act. That definitely sounds like a video game.
It does. It was introduced in January of this year, 2026, by Representative Brian Mast. This bill is the other side of the coin. It explicitly treats the most advanced chips like weapons sales, like selling an F-16 fighter jet.
So it codifies the idea that a chip is a weapon.
Precisely. It proposes a specific temporary ban on selling NVIDIA's Blackwell chips. That's the really high-end stuff, the successor to the H100 to any adversary, for 2 years.
Only 2 years. Why not forever? If it's a weapon, you don't sell it to your enemies, period.
Because in the chip world, 2 years is an eternity. The logic here is a recognition of reality. You can't stop the technology from leaking or being replicated eventually. Physics works the same in Beijing as it does in Silicon Valley.
Right.
So the goal isn't permanent prevention, it's managed delay. The idea is, if we can guarantee a 2-year lead for our own AI labs and our own military, we win. The race is about staying ahead, not stopping them completely.
So we are just trying to stay one lap ahead on the track at all times.
Exactly. And then you have the tariffs, which are the enforcement mechanism. In January 2026, we saw a presidential proclamation slapping a 25% tariff on advanced AI chips imported into the U.S.
Wait, I'm confused. Importing into the U.S.? I thought we wanted more chips here. Why would we tax chips coming into our own country?
That's the puzzle, right?
Right.
But the analysts are pretty clear on this. They view it as an enforcement hammer. For that 15% revenue sharing deal, most of NVIDIA's chips are designed here, but they're fabricated by TSMC in Taiwan and then imported. This tariff is likely a way for the government to say to the chip companies, look, if you don't play ball with the tax on your China sales, we are going to make your life difficult and hurt your margins right here at home.
It's economic statecraft with a sledgehammer.
That's the Trump administration's playbook in a nutshell.
Man, the corporate side of this must just be a nightmare. You're Jensen Huang at NVIDIA. You're just trying to make the best graphics cards. And suddenly you're navigating trade wars, export controls, tariffs, and revenue sharing with the Treasury Department.
Oh, they aren't just navigating it. They are playing the game brilliantly. This is what the reports call the calibrated chip phenomenon. It's a masterclass in corporate cat and mouse.
How so?
Every time the Department of Commerce draws a line in the sand saying, you can't sell a chip that has a performance faster than this specific number, NVIDIA goes back to the lab and designs a chip that is exactly 1% slower than that line.
Softs. It's malicious compliance on a geopolitical scale.
It's survival, and it's smart business. Look at the history. It's all right there. The US banned the A100 chip from being sold to China. So what did NVIDIA do? They created the A800, which was just a slightly slower A100.
And the U.S. banned that one, too.
Exactly. So NVIDIA went back and created a whole new lineup, the H20, the L20, and the L2, all specifically designed to thread the needle of the U.S. export rules.
Okay, let's dig into the H20. The sources mention it a lot. Why is this specific chip the loophole chip?
To really get the H20, we have to talk for a second about the difference between training and inference in AI.
Okay, break that down for me like I'm 5.
Okay, think of training as sending an AI to law school. You have to force it to read millions of case files, thousands of legal textbooks, every statute ever written. It takes an incredible amount of raw brute force brain power and time. That's what the super advanced chips like the H100 or the new Blackwell chips do. They train the model, they create the lawyer.
In inference.
Inference is the lawyer actually working in the courtroom. You ask a specific question, what's the precedent for this case? And the lawyer, based on everything they learned, gives you an answer. It requires less raw learning power, but it needs really fast access to its memory to pull up the relevant information.
Got it. Law school versus courtroom.
Exactly. The H20 chip is designed to be really, really good at the courtroom part inference, but it's been intentionally crippled at the law school part training. Its raw computing power is much lower than its siblings, but its memory bandwidth is still high.
So the strategic thinking is, we're letting China use already trained AI models, but we're trying to stop them from creating the next GPT-5 or the next superintelligence.
That is the strategic bet,
Right.
and it's a huge bet. As of August 2025, the U.S. government officially licensed the H20 for sale in China again, as long as that 15% revenue share is paid.
It's a very messy compromise. It keeps U.S. companies profitable, which funds their R&D to stay ahead, while theoretically keeping the god-tier chips out of China's hands.
Theoretically. But everyone knows it's a leaky bucket.
So that's the U.S. side. We are squeezing, we're taxing, we're playing 4D chess with export controls.
Yes.
But what about the other side? Let's look at the scorecard for Made in China 2025.
Yes.
That initiative launched over 10 years ago. The 2025 deadline has now passed.
Yeah.
So the big question, did they make it? Did they succeed?
Well, if you ask a politician in Washington, the answer is usually a simple, they're cheating and they're winning and we're doomed. If you look at the actual data in this U.S.-China Commission report, the answer is much more mixed, but formidable.
Formidable how? What was the actual goal?
The stated goal of Made in China 2025 was to transform the country from being a large manufacturer to a strong one. They wanted to stop just being the world's assembly floor for iPhones and start inventing the core technology inside them.
They used a few key strategies for this, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
wasn't just about wishing it to happen.
Oh, no, it was a full court press, massive mobilization of state resources, huge subsidies, forced technology transfer. You know, the old, if you want access to our market, you have to build a factory here and teach us how you do it.
The quid pro quo.
Right. And, of course, a healthy dose of industrial espionage and intellectual property theft.
Okay, so report card time. Let's start with the wins. Where did they succeed? What industries does China now dominate because of this plan?
The biggest win, and it's not even close, is electric vehicles. EVs. This is a massive, undeniable success story for Beijing and, frankly, a massive failure of foresight for the West.
I'm looking at the stats here in the commission report. BYD, that's the big Chinese brand, Build Your Dreams, sold 4.2 million new energy vehicles in 2024.
Staggering, isn't it?
That's more than most legacy automakers sell of all their cars combined.
It is. Chinese brands as a whole now hold 62% of the global EV market. More than 6 out of every 10 EVs sold in the world is a Chinese brand.
How did they do that so fast? Was it just cheap labor and government money?
No, that's the lazy answer, and it's the wrong one. They won because of total, ruthless vertical integration. They realized 15, almost 20 years ago, that in an EV, the battery is the engine. So they went out and bought the lithium mines in Africa and South America. They built the chemical refineries. They built the battery factories.
I own the whole stack.
They own the entire chain from the dirt in the ground to the car in the driveway. While Western automakers were still debating emission standards, China was buying the supply chain for the future of transportation.
That is a very effective strategy.
It is, and they subsidized the demand side heavily. They built charging stations, gave tax breaks, they created a massive domestic market, perfected their products there, and now they're exporting them to the rest of the world at prices Detroit and Munich can't match.
Okay, so if EVs are the big commercial win, the report says the next one is more of a strategic threat, shipbuilding.
This one, yeah. This one honestly freaked me out when I read the prep notes for this.
Oh, it should. It's a shocking statistic. In 2024, China delivered 53% of the world's ships by gross tonnage. More than half the ships built on planet Earth were built in a Chinese shipyard.
And the U.S. number, just for comparison,
It was roughly 0.2% in 2022.
0.2%. That's not an industry, that's a hobby. It's a statistical rounding error.
It is. And here's why that matters so much. According to the security review, it's not just about building cargo ships to carry all those EVs. Shipbuilding is a dual-use industry.
Explain that.
The same massive shipyard that builds a commercial oil tanker or a container ship uses the exact same dry docks, the same steel supply, the same skilled welders, and the same naval architects to build a destroyer or an amphibious landing ship for the PLA Navy. So they're keeping their entire industrial base hot.
Red hot. They have a continuously running production line. If a war starts, they don't have to ramp up. They just switch the blueprints from tanker to warship. We, on the other hand, have let our entire shipbuilding capacity atrophy. In a crisis, we would have to build the shipyards before we could even start to build the ships.
In a short, sharp conflict, that's a fatal disadvantage.
It could be.
Okay,
Yeah.
so they're on their way to owning the roads with EVs. They own the seas with shipbuilding. What about the power grid?
Another big win for them: green energy and electrical equipment. They have over 80% of the global market share in solar panel manufacturing. They dominate wind turbines. And, maybe most impressively, they've pioneered and now dominate ultra-high voltage transmission lines. They have 90% of that global share.
So they're building the infrastructure for the global energy transition.
They are. They make the panels, the turbines, and the wires to connect them all.
Okay, so the scorecard looks pretty red so far, a lot of Chinese flags. Where did the plan fall short? Where did they fail?
They struggled and are still struggling in sectors with extremely high complexity and very strong entrenched incumbents. Aviation is the prime example.
The C919 jet.
Exactly. The goal was to break the Boeing-Airbus duopoly, create a third global player.
And I've seen pictures of it. It looks like a standard passenger jet. It looks like a 737 or an A320.
It looks like one, absolutely. And building a plane that looks like a plane is a non-trivial achievement. But looking like a jet and being a globally certified, economically competitive jet are two very different things.
So what's the catch?
The C999 is flying, yes. But here's the big secret. It relies heavily on Western engines. The engines are made by a joint venture of General Electric and Safran, a French company.
So if the U.S. and France decided to sanction those engines, the entire C919 fleet is just a bunch of very expensive paperweights.
Instantly. They are grounded. On top of that, it lacks international safety certification from the FAA in the US or EASA in Europe. And without those, no major international airline will touch it.
So it's mostly just flying domestically within China.
For now, yes. They haven't really broken into the global market. They have had some small success with their smaller regional jet, the C909, selling a few to places like Indonesia and Cambodia. But they are not a global challenger to Boeing and Airbus yet. Not even close.
And a similar story in medical devices.
Very similar story. For the really high-end stuff, the advanced CT scanners, MRI machines, robotic surgery systems, they're still heavily reliant on imports. The optics, the precision engineering, the software. That's all still dominated by German, Japanese, and American firms like Siemens, GE, and Philips.
Okay, that brings us to the main event.
Yeah.
The absolute core battlefield of this whole conflict.
Yeah.
Semiconductors.
The big one.
Did Made in China 2025 achieve chip independence?
This is the most nuanced and, frankly, the most important verdict of them all. If you just look at their own aggressive targets, they were aiming for 70% self-sufficiency in chips by 2025, then it was an abject failure.
They missed it by a mile.
A country mile. The best estimates, and these are from the Commission report, put them somewhere between 16% and 30% self-sufficiency. So, a big miss.
So we could say failure or move on.
Not at all. That's the trap. You have to split the chip world into two distinct categories: advanced nodes and what we call legacy or mature nodes.
Okay, split them for me.
Advanced nodes are the brain cells. These are the 5 nanometer, the 3 nanometer, and now the 2 nanometer chips, the ones inside your newest iPhone, or the NVIDIA Blackwell GPU for AI. In this race, China is struggling badly.
Why?
They can't get the tools. The U.S. and its allies have blocked them from buying the EUV lithography machines needed to make these chips. Their national champion, SMIC, is stuck using older DUV machines and this incredibly complex multi-patterning technique to make 7 nanometer chips. It works, kind of, but it's brutally expensive, the yields are terrible, and it's horribly inefficient. They are bleeding money to do it.
Okay, so on the high end, the U.S. chokehold is working. But what about the legacy nodes?
This is the hidden danger. This is the part of the story that most people miss. Legacy nodes are the boring chips, 28 nanometers and above.
Why do we care about boring chips?
Because the world runs on boring. Your car's braking system, your microwave oven, the control systems for the power grid, your medical devices, and yes, the guidance fins on a standard missile. They don't need to be super fast. They need to be cheap, reliable, and available in massive quantities.
And China is winning here.
They're absolutely crushing it. Here's the stat from the report. China's manufacturing capacity for these foundational chips grew 4 times faster than global demand.
So they're deliberately overproducing on a massive scale.
Exactly. And the strategy is what some analysts are calling weaponized ubiquity. Think about it like Amazon pricing out a small bookstore. If China floods the global market with perfectly good legacy chips that cost 50 cents, while Western fabs in the US or Europe need to charge $1.50 just to break even, what happens?
The Western fabs go out of business. They can't compete.
Correct. And once the Western legacy fabs shut down for good, China has a global monopoly on the chips that run everything. Then, suddenly, the entire world is dependent on Beijing for the basic components that make modern life function.
So they can turn off the tap.
They can turn off the tap. It's a different kind of leverage than having the fastest AI chip, but in a crisis, it might be even more powerful. If you cut off the supply of $1 chips, Ford stops making cars. General Electric stops making MRI machines. The global economy grinds to a halt.
It's like being the only company in the world that sells nails. You might not design the skyscraper, but the skyscraper falls down without you.
That is a perfect analogy.
This all brings me back to the supply chain itself. I keep coming back to this question in my head. China has basically unlimited money. They have brilliant engineers. They have a very active espionage program. Why can't they just copy the advanced tech? Why is it so hard to just build one of those EUV machines?
I love this question because it forces us to respect the physics and the complexity. Money can't buy time, and it can't buy physics. The supply chain for an advanced chip is the most complex machine humanity has ever built, period. Let's just talk about EUV, extreme ultraviolet lithography.
This is the magic machine that ASML in the Netherlands makes, right?
Yes, ASML. The only company in the universe that sells these things, which cost about $200 million each. To make an advanced chip, you need to print features onto silicon that are the size of a virus. To do that, you need light with a very, very tiny wavelength EUV light.
And how do you make that light? You can't just buy an EUV light bulb at the store.
No. Here is the insane process. You take a microscopic droplet of molten tin, you shoot it with a high-powered laser inside a vacuum chamber. Then, a fraction of a second later, you shoot it again midair with an even more powerful laser to vaporize it into a super hot plasma.
Okay.
This plasma emits EUV light. Then you have to capture that faint light with a series of the most perfect mirrors ever created. Not glass mirrors, because glass absorbs EUV, but mirrors made of hundreds of alternating layers of silicon and molybdenum, polished to a flatness that if you expanded the mirror to the size of Germany, the biggest bump would be less than a millimeter high.
That sounds like science fiction.
It basically is. And all of this happens in a perfect vacuum, 50,000 times a second, continuously for months on end without failing.
Okay, I get it now. You can't just steal the blueprints for that and build it in a shed over the weekend.
Exactly. The machine itself is a miracle of global cooperation. It requires a supply chain of 5,000 specialized suppliers. German optics from Zeiss, American light sources, Japanese chemicals. China can't buy the machine, and they can't replicate the 30 years of integrated global knowledge needed to build one from scratch.
You mentioned Japanese chemicals. Is that another one of these critical choke
They're a
points?
huge one. Japan controls about 90% of the global market for high-end photoresists. This is the special chemical goo you coat the silicon wafer with to actually print the pattern using the EUV light.
So without that goo, the $200 million machine is useless.
It's a very expensive paperweight. If Japan stops shipping those chemicals, the fabs in Taiwan and Arizona stop working in a matter of weeks. You can't just synthesize this stuff in a normal lab. It requires decades of chemical engineering to achieve the necessary purity.
So China's trying to break these choke points with their new Big Fun 3, which is almost $50 billion. But it's a steep, steep uphill climb.
It's a vertical cliff face in a blizzard.
And all the while, the technology isn't standing still while they try to catch up. The goalposts are constantly moving.
That's the other killer problem for them. The AI boom has completely changed the hardware priorities. It's not just about the raw processing power of the chip anymore, it's about memory. specifically high bandwidth memory or HBM.
I saw a note about SK Hynix in the sources. I usually think of Samsung when I think of Korean tech and memory chips.
And for decades, you would have been right. This is a huge shakeup. For years, Samsung was the undisputed king of memory. But SK Hynix, the other South Korean firm, made a huge bet on HBM for AI years ago. They realized that for these massive AI models, the bottleneck isn't how fast the chip can think, but how fast it can access data from its memory.
So they basically built a faster, wider pipeline for the data to flow through.
They built a skyscraper. HBM is literally stacking memory chips on top of each other vertically and then punching thousands of microscopic holes through them, called through-silicon vias, to connect them. This allows a massive amount of data to flow instantly between the memory and the processor.
And their bet paid off.
Big time. SK Hynix leapfrogged Samsung. They now capture over 50% of the HBM market, and crucially, they are the main supplier for NVIDIA's AI chips. In the January 2026 earnings report, SK Hynix actually reported higher operating profits than Samsung for the first time in history.
Wow.
That is a historic tectonic shift in the industry.
It just shows how quickly this AI wave is reshaping the entire corporate hierarchy. If you miss the boat on AI, you get left behind, even if you're a giant like Samsung.
Exactly. And the next big frontier where the battle is moving now is advanced packaging.
Packaging. That sounds so low-tech, like putting the chip in a little cardboard box.
Lapses. It's a bit more high-tech than that. We're hitting the physical limits of how small we can make transistors. We can't shrink them forever. So instead of making one single, giant, perfect chip, which gets harder and more expensive to do, the industry is moving to breaking them up into smaller, specialized chiplets.
So it's like Lego blocks.
Yeah, it's exactly like Lego blocks. You make a specialized memory block, a logic block, a graphics block, and you stitch them all together very tightly in a single package.
And the sources say China is actually okay at this part.
China is strong here traditionally because packaging has always been more labor and capital intensive and less dependent on those cutting-edge EUV machines. But now, the leading edge of packaging is moving to things like silicon photonics, using light instead of electricity to move data inside the chip package. That's where TSMC and Intel are pushing hard to maintain their lead.
Speaking of Intel and TSMC, what about the whole effort to bring chip making back home, the reshoring effort? We hear about the Chip PS Act constantly. Is it working? Are we actually making chips in America yet?
It's slow, and it's very, very expensive. Building a fab in the U.S. is not the same as building one in Taiwan. TSMC is building new fabs in Arizona. We've all seen the headlines about the 12 fabs they plan to build, but they are facing massive labor shortages. We just don't have enough pipe fitters, electricians, and crucially, engineers who know how to install and run these incredibly complex machines.
Then the costs are much higher here.
Much higher. And the cultural clash, according to some reports, is real. TSMC engineers in Taiwan are used to being on call 24/7. It's a different work culture. American engineers aren't.
And Europe seems to be having an even harder time than we are.
Europe is suffering from what one report called fragmented ambition. Everyone wants a fab, but no one wants to coordinate. The biggest blow was when Intel officially canceled its planned Magdeburg factory in Germany in August of 2025.
Ouch.
That was a huge setback for the EU's chip ambitions. They had put a lot of political capital and eggs into that one basket.
What about Japan? You mentioned them earlier as this chemical superpower. Are they trying to make chips again?
Japan is taking a very different and very interesting approach. A moonshot, they're calling it. They have a state-backed venture called Rapidus, and their plan is to try and jump straight to manufacturing 2-nanometer chips by 2027.
So they're trying to skip all the intermediate steps.
Exactly. They're trying to leapfrog everyone.
That sounds incredibly risky.
It is. It's a huge gamble. But they have IBM helping them with the core design technology. If it works, Japan is suddenly back in the game as a leading-edge chip manufacturer. If it fails, they've burned a whole lot of yen.
So the global map is being completely redrawn. You have new factories struggling to get started in Arizona, moonshots in Japan, cancellations in Germany, and China just flooding the zone with legacy chips. It's a truly chaotic landscape.
It is. And that chaos extends to the domestic policy right here in the U.S.
Yeah, well, let's bring it back home. Because while we're in this huge fight with China, we're also kind of fighting with ourselves.
That's a good way to put it.
I was looking at the 2026 AI policy outlook, and it's striking. Is there actually a unified set of rules for AI in America yet?
The short answer, no, not at all. It is an absolute mess. We have what everyone calls a patchwork Congress has tried and failed multiple times to pass a comprehensive national framework for AI.
And so the states are stepping into that vacuum.
Exactly. The states are acting as laboratories of democracy, as they say. California, Colorado, Texas, they were all passing their own AI laws governing everything from algorithmic bias in hiring to transparency rules for chatbots.
I assume California is leading the charge as usual.
California's SB 53 is basically setting the standard because the market is just so big. If you want to sell an AI product in California, you have to follow their rules. And since every company wants to sell in California, their rules effectively become the de facto national standard.
But the federal government doesn't like that, right? There's a push for preemption.
A huge battle. The federal government, particularly under the current administration, does not want 50 different rule books. Republicans like Senator Cruz and Representative Obernoll are pushing hard for federal laws that would override or preempt all the state laws. They argue it's too complicated and expensive for businesses to comply with the patchwork.
And the Trump administration is taking concrete action on this.
Very aggressively. There was a new executive order in December 2025 called Ensuring a National Policy for AI. It explicitly calls the patchwork of state regulations a direct threat to American competitiveness against China.
Strong words.
And they're backing it up with action. The Department of Justice has created a new AI litigation task force, and its primary job is to sue states to stop their local AI laws from taking effect.
Wow. So the federal government is suing states like California to stop them from regulating AI, all under the argument that we need to move faster to compete better with China.
That's the argument in a nutshell. Clean preemption has turned into a managed conflict between the feds and the states.
And all the while, the defense angle is sharpening. The sources keep referring to the Department of War. I had to do a double take at that. We haven't officially called it that since 1947.
It's a rhetorical shift, for sure, but it signals a very real mindset shift. The DoD, or the Dow in this context, is focusing intensely on warfighter readiness and supply chain visibility. They are stockpiling semiconductors, they're stockpiling critical minerals. They're treating the supply chain not just as a commercial issue, but as a matter of logistical survival for a potential conflict.
So they want to know where every single component comes from.
They want to know where the screw that holds the chip bracket in the missile comes from. Total visibility.
So we have covered a huge amount of ground here. We've got the U.S. using tariffs, taxes, and tech bans to try and strangle China's advanced capabilities. We have China dominating the legacy market, the shipyards and EVs, but struggling to break that 5-nanometer barrier. And we have a fragmented, chaotic regulatory landscape at home. If you had to synthesize all of this, who is winning as of today?
It's asymmetric. You can't look at just one scoreboard. The U.S. still holds the high ground. We have the innovation, the design, the AI software, the NVIDIA Blackwell chips. We are, for now, winning the race for the brain of the future.
But China.
China is seizing the ground floor. They have the manufacturing scale, they have the EVs, the ships, the solar panels, the legacy chips. They are winning the race for the body of the global economy.
So we have the brain, they have the body. That feels unstable. A brain without a body can't do much in the physical world, and a body without a brain is just a brute.
It is deeply unstable, and it's dangerous. The real risk here is that we are moving out of an era of globalization and into an era of techno-nationalism. The goal isn't just to run faster than the other guy anymore. The goal is to trip the other runner.
And when you're tied together.
When you're tied together by these incredibly complex supply chains, tripping the other guy usually means you fall down hard too.
That is a perfect, if unsettling, image. Before we wrap up, I want to ask for one final thought. Something for our listeners to chew on after they take their earbuds out and go about their day.
Okay. I want you to think about a small but very significant event called the Nexperia episode. This happened back in late 2025. Dutch authorities in the Netherlands actually seized a Chinese-owned chip plant.
Seized it, like nationalized it. Yeah. Took the keys.
Took the keys. It was a legacy plant, making simple, boring chips for the auto industry. But they seized it, citing national security concerns. This tells us that we are entering a new era where the ownership of a factory itself is a national security crisis. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If China comes to dominate the supply of all the boring chips, the ones that cost $1, that run your toaster, your car's brakes, your pacemaker, does it really matter if the U.S. has the world's fastest AI supercomputer in a lab somewhere?
That's the weaponized ubiquity thing coming back again.
It's everything. The next global crisis might not be a shortage of superintelligence. It might be a shortage of the dumb, cheap, commodity chips that actually make the modern world function. And right now, we are letting China corner that market while we obsess, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, over the high end.
That is a haunting thought. We're so focused on the shiny new AI, we might be losing the very foundation that it all stands on.
We might be.
Well, on that cheerful note, we are going to wrap it up. I want to thank you for listening to this deep dive into the chip war. As you go about your day, take a look at your smartphone. Really look at it. It's not just a gadget.
Not at all.
It is a geopolitical artifact. It's a collection of minerals, designs, and chips that nations are fighting a new kind of war over right now.
It's the most contested few square inches of real estate on Earth.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next deep dive.